Look at this woman on your screen. A few years ago, Emma thought she was happily married. 2 kids, a cozy house, smiling photos in the backyard. From the outside, her life was perfect. But behind that perfect picture, something was quietly breaking. Her husband started working late. His phone never left his hand. Little excuses, little lies, a hotel booking that didn't make sense, a crumpled receipt for a romantic dinner she never went on. Tonight, you're going to see what really happened, from the moment she found the messages to the night she finally said, "I'm done." This isn't a movie. This is a true story, and it might feel uncomfortably close to yours.
My name isn't really Emma, but that's the name I'll use here. I'm 41 now, and when I look back, it still amazes me how a life can look so solid from the outside and yet be crumbling quietly on the inside. For most of my 30s, I was the lucky one in other people's eyes. I had a husband, Tom, who everybody seemed to like. We had 2 kids, a little house on a quiet street, a minivan, Sunday lunches with family, Christmas photos where everyone was smiling. If you scrolled my social media back then, you would have seen birthday posts with captions like, "So grateful for this man and this family," and pictures of us at barbecues, school plays, church events. I meant those words when I wrote them. I really did. I met Tom in my early 20s. He was funny, charming, the life of the party. We met at a friend's game night, and he made me laugh so hard my cheeks hurt. He walked me to my car afterward and said, "I'm going to marry you someday." It felt like destiny. Within a year, we were engaged. We didn't have much money, but we had plans. We talked about traveling, about having kids, about building a home where our children would always feel safe. In the beginning, he made me feel chosen. He would text me good morning every day. He remembered small things I said and turned them into surprises. My favorite snack, my favorite flowers, silly little notes in my bag. I wasn't naive. I knew no relationship was perfect. But I thought we had the kind of love that could survive anything, as long as we stuck together. No one teaches you how to recognize the moment when love slowly turns into something else, when partnership turns into imbalance, when trust becomes a one-way street. Looking back now, I can see the signs. At the time, I just called them phases. The first real shift happened after our second child was born. I was exhausted. I had gained weight. I was sleeping in pieces. My days were a loop of feeding, changing, laundry, trying to keep the toddler from climbing everything. Tom went back to work 2 weeks after the baby came. I remember standing at the window with our newborn in my arms, watching him drive away, feeling a mix of gratitude and resentment I didn't know how to name. He started staying late at the office. At first, it made sense. He worked in sales. There were deadlines, targets, big clients he couldn't afford to lose. "Do what you have to do," I told him. "We're fine here." But as the months passed, the late nights didn't stop. If anything, they increased. He would come home at 9, 10, sometimes 11 at night. He'd smell like cologne and fast food. He'd kiss the kids, kiss my forehead, and collapse on the couch with his phone. When I tried to talk about my day, he'd nod absent-mindedly, eyes on the screen. Sometimes he'd say, "I'm just drained, Em. Can we not do this right now?" I started to feel like a background character in my own home. There were other signs, smaller, easier to brush off. He stopped noticing things. If I got a haircut, he'd say nothing. If I put on makeup for date night, he'd glance at me and say, "You ready?" while checking the time. He stopped asking how I was doing in any real way. If I said I was tired, he'd respond with, "We're all tired," as if that closed the subject. And then there was the phone. For years, his phone had just been there, on the counter, on the coffee table, plugged into the kitchen charger. One day, almost without me noticing when it started, it became an extension of his hand. He took it everywhere. To the bathroom, to the bedroom. He started sleeping with it on his side, screen facing him. He put a new password on it, more complicated than before. I joked one night, "Wow, top secret stuff now." He chuckled and said, "Just work. We had a security talk. Don't worry about it." And that's what I did. I didn't worry about it. Or at least that's what I told myself every time my stomach tightened when his phone lit up and he tilted it away from me. One memory from that period feels like a warning I ignored. It was a Friday. He was supposed to be working late, again. By 8:30, the kids were asleep, and I was loading the dishwasher when I heard a notification on the family laptop in the office. We had a shared email account we used for bills, school stuff, things like that. I went to check, thinking it was a message from the school or a reminder about a payment. It was an email confirmation for a hotel reservation. 2 nights, downtown, king-size bed, 2 guests. The reservation was for the following weekend. Tom had told me he was going on a work retreat with his team. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. I opened the details, looking for something that would make it harmless. A company name, a group booking. There was nothing like that. It was a personal reservation. His name, his card. I heard the garage door open. He was home. I closed the laptop so quickly you'd think it burned me. My hands were shaking as I wiped the counter, pretending to clean. When he came into the kitchen, he kissed my cheek, told me about some crazy client while opening the fridge. My mind was racing. The words, "I saw the hotel reservation," sat on my tongue like a stone, but I swallowed them. Instead, I asked, "How was your day?" He shrugged, same old, and changed the subject. That night, lying next to him in the dark, I stared at the ceiling and argued with myself. Maybe it's a work thing and they just used his name. Maybe he's planning a surprise for us and doesn't want to ruin it. Maybe I'm being paranoid. He wouldn't do that. Not Tom. It's amazing what your mind will do to protect your heart from breaking. I wish I could tell you I confronted him then. I didn't. I chose not to know because knowing felt like it would destroy everything. The truth, of course, was that everything was already cracking. I was just pretending not to hear the sound. The moment that finally tore through my denial came in the most ordinary way. I was doing laundry. People always assume the big truths show up in cinematic ways. A dramatic confession, someone storming into a room with evidence in hand. Sometimes it's just a pair of jeans and a forgotten pocket. I reached into the pocket of his work pants and pulled out a folded receipt. I almost threw it away without looking. We were always shoving receipts into pockets and losing them. But something made me open it. It was from a restaurant I knew. Not a cheap one. 2 entrees, a bottle of wine, dessert for 2. The date was from the previous Tuesday. On Tuesday, he had told me he was going on a late business meeting and that I shouldn't wait up. I stood there in the laundry room,
holding that little piece of paper, feeling like someone had reached inside my chest and squeezed. My first instinct was the same as always. Explain it away. Maybe it was a client dinner. Maybe there were other people there and it just looks like it was for two. But there's a difference between guessing and knowing. And suddenly, I was very, very tired of guessing. That night, I waited until he fell asleep. His breathing slowed. The room was dark, lit only by the digital clock. My hands shook as I reached over and picked up his phone from the nightstand. For a moment, I just held it there, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it would wake him. Then, I typed in the password I had watched him enter 100 times, hoping it wouldn't work. It did. The screen unlocked, and with it, the version of my life I thought I was living.
I opened his messages first. There were the usual threads: work groups, friends, family. And then there was a name I didn't recognize. Lena? Star? My body went cold. I clicked on it. The conversation stretched back for months. Flirty messages, good morning, good night, drive safe, thinking of you. There were photos. Her at a cafe, her in a mirror dressed up to go out, her feet tangled with his on what was clearly a hotel bed. I scrolled and scrolled, my stomach turning. There were references I recognized to nights he'd told me he was working late or meeting the guys. He had written to her, "I love how you listen to me. With you, I feel alive again. With you, I feel alive again." As if our home, our kids, our life were some kind of coma. At one point, he wrote, "She doesn't suspect anything. She just thinks I'm busy." She. Me. I don't think I've ever felt so simultaneously invisible and exposed. I read until the words blurred and I realized I was crying silently, tears running down my neck onto the pillow. I took the phone to the bathroom so I wouldn't wake him and sat on the floor, back against the cold tub, the screen glowing in my hands. There's a special kind of pain in realizing that while you were worrying about being too emotional or too demanding, someone else was using your trust as their cover. Sitting there, on that bathroom floor, I felt something inside me crack. Not the part of me that loved him. That part had been dying slowly for a while. The part that died was the version of me that believed his comfort was more important than my reality. For the first time, the thought came clearly. I can't unknow this, and I can't unsee myself anymore either. The next day, everything looked normal on the surface. Kids needing breakfast, lunches to pack, emails from work, the dog needing to be let out. Tom moved around the kitchen like always, making coffee, checking his phone, kissing the top of my head as he passed. I felt like I was watching a stranger play my husband. I didn't say anything that day, or the day after. I was trying to figure out who I was now that I knew. I started seeing a therapist the following week. Making that appointment was terrifying. It felt like admitting that my marriage might truly be over, and that wasn't a sentence I was ready to say out loud yet. In the first session, I told her everything. How we met, how things changed after the kids, the hotel email,
the receipt, the messages, the photos. I cried so hard I could barely get the words out. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, very gently, "You've told me a lot about what you've done to hold this marriage together. I'm curious, what has he done?" I opened my mouth, ready to list things, and realized how much of our relationship had become me compensating, smoothing, excusing. She asked me, "What do you want?" The question landed like a foreign language. What did I want? Not what my kids needed, not what my husband expected, not what would keep the peace. What did I, Emma, as a person, want my life to look like? I didn't know. I realized I hadn't asked myself that in a very long time. The one thing I knew for sure was this. I didn't want to keep living a life where I was constantly guessing what was real.
The confrontation happened about 2 weeks after I found the messages. I had rehearsed it in my head 100 times. Sometimes I screamed. Sometimes I sobbed. Sometimes I packed a suitcase in imaginative fury and walked away without a word. In reality, when the moment came, it was almost quiet. The kids were at a friend's house. We were at the kitchen table, the same place we'd paid bills and planned birthdays and argued about nothing. "I need to talk to you," I said. He looked up, mildly annoyed, like I was interrupting a show he liked. "About what?" he asked. "About Lena." His entire face changed. Color drained, jaw tightened, eyes darted away. He laughed once, a short, nervous sound. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I saw your messages," I said. "The hotel, the photos, the dates, I know." Silence. There is a kind of silence that feels like a scream. He ran his hands over his face. "Okay," he said finally. "Okay, yes, I messed up, but it's not what you think. It's not serious. It just happened. I was stressed. I felt lonely. You've been so busy with the kids. Don't," I cut him off. My voice surprised me with how steady it sounded. "Don't turn this into me not doing enough. I was here. I was always here. You had a choice." He started crying. He said he loved me. He said he was sorry. He said he would end it. He said, "We can get past this. We can be stronger. Please don't throw our family away over a mistake." Those words, "throw our family away," stung. Because that's what people sometimes do when they've broken something. They hand you the pieces and call you the destroyer if you don't glue it back together. I told him I needed space. I slept in the guest room. He texted apologies from down the hall. He sent me songs we used to listen to. He promised the world in future tense. Meanwhile, I watched what he did in the present. For a short while, he tried. He showed me a text where he supposedly ended things with her. He let me scroll through his phone when I asked. He came home earlier. He sat closer on the couch. We went to 2 couples therapy sessions. In the room with the therapist, he was reflective, emotional, saying all the right things. But outside, the real test wasn't how sorry he sounded. It was how consistent he was. Slowly, the old patterns crept back. Work started getting busy again. The phone was back in his hand, face down on the table. He canceled therapy sessions because it's just too much right now, or the timing isn't great. One evening, he sighed and said,
How long are you going to punish me for this? I said I was sorry. When are you going to get over it? And that was the moment something inside me snapped into focus. I'm not punishing you. I'm living with the consequences of what you chose. There's a difference. I realized that to him, forgiveness meant forgetting. To me, forgiveness would have meant rebuilding trust through consistent effort, something he wasn't truly willing to do. My therapist asked me one day, Emma, imagine nothing changes from how it is right now. Same patterns, same effort level from him. Do you want this to be your life 10 years from now? I pictured it. The doubt, the checking, the feeling of being half-loved and wholly responsible for keeping everything afloat. I felt physically sick. I said no. It was the clearest answer I'd given to anything in months.
Leaving was not a single moment. It was a series of moments that ended with a decision I had been circling for a long time. I met with a lawyer. I learned what my options were. I cried in the parking lot afterward, grieving a future that would never happen. I opened a bank account in my own name. I updated my resume. I talked to a friend I trusted and finally said the words, "I don't think I can stay." Everyone likes to say, if that happened to me, I'd be gone. The reality is much messier when there are kids, finances, years of history, and a part of you still clinging to what you hoped they could be. In the end, the decision became simple, not because it was easy, but because the alternative felt unbearable. One night, after the kids were asleep, we sat at that same kitchen table. "I'm filing for divorce," I said. He stared at me like I'd just spoken another language. "You can't be serious," he said. "People work through worse than this. You're really going to break up our family over one mistake?" "One mistake?" I repeated quietly. This wasn't one night. This was months of lying. Every receipt, every message, every time you looked me in the eye and chose to let me doubt myself instead of telling me the truth. That's not one mistake. That's a pattern. He begged. He pleaded. He promised again. I listened. I believed he was sorry. But I had finally reached the point where my self-respect spoke louder than his regret. "I will not teach our children that this is what love looks like," I said. "I'd rather they see two separate homes filled with honesty than one home full of secrets." It broke me to say it, but it would have destroyed me to stay. The months after I left were some of the hardest and truest of my life. I moved into a small rental with the kids, half the size of our old house, thin walls, no backyard, and yet for the first time in years, I could breathe deeply in my own home. I learned how much everything really cost. I made a budget. I took on extra shifts at work. I said no to unnecessary expenses and yes to every opportunity that felt aligned with the life I wanted to build. There were nights I cried into my pillow from sheer exhaustion, trying to be both parents, trying to heal my heart while also packing lunches and checking homework. There were days the loneliness felt like a physical weight, but there were also moments of unexpected joy. Saturday mornings, making pancakes with my kids in our tiny kitchen, music playing, laughing as flowers spilled on the floor. Quiet evenings after they were in bed, when I could drink tea on the couch and not wonder who my husband was texting. I joined an online support group for women healing from infidelity. Reading their stories, I stopped asking, "What's wrong with me?" And I started asking, What's wrong with the way we teach women to tolerate pain and call it loyalty? I began to share my own story, at first anonymously, then more openly. I started speaking to a small group at our community center, other women going through separation and betrayal. Every time I said out loud, what they did is about them, how you heal is about you, I felt those words anchoring deeper into my own bones. Today, years later, my life is not perfect, but it is honest. I am not the woman on the bathroom floor anymore, clutching a phone like it's the only source of truth. I am the woman who listens to her own voice first. If you take anything from my story, let it be this. You can survive the worst thing you thought could happen to your heart. You can build a life on the other side that is quieter, smaller on paper maybe, but richer in peace and self-respect. Being betrayed was not my fault. Staying broken would have been my responsibility. I chose not to stay broken. I chose myself. And you are allowed to choose yourself too.